Hello, and welcome back to Come Now and Let Us Reason Together. We are going to continue talking about Isaiah chapter 2 today. I apologize that I still have a bit of a cold. You know, it is what it is. When your inspiration strikes, you just gotta roll with it, even if it means your voice is a little sour and funky sounding. I hope that the reviews of chapter 1 in part 1 and part 2 were helpful for setting a good foundation for what's to come. Today, I'd like to continue by doing a little bit more imagery work because that is Isaiah's strong suit. He's really good at word painting, trying to give you a picture in your mind of what he's envisioning, but only using the words that are at his disposal. Research has been done, and it is postulated that Isaiah chapter 1 isn't the true beginning to the book of Isaiah, but that chapter 2 is. It's much like in Doctrine and Covenants how section 1 isn't chronologically in order. It's not the first revelation that was given to Joseph Smith. Instead, it's a preface for the entire book, which is actually written by Jehovah. Isaiah chapter 1, we don't know conclusively if Isaiah wrote it, but, it's assumed to be that Isaiah wrote it, and it is a preface to the entire book of Isaiah. So if we consider chapter 2 as the true beginning, the first revelation that Isaiah is given to speak to the Israelites, then we get a really cool insight on how God operates, what his first words are to an unrighteous people, and where he sees all of this going. So we're going to talk about that. We'll also read through the entire chapter 2 together. I'll do that first. That way, for those that don't want to stick around for the entire length of the podcast, they can at least get a reading of it from Sefaria.org read to them. And I will put pictures up as well for all of the visual people out there. Because, Isaiah is just such a highly visual book that to do it without visualization of some kind would just be a travesty. So we'll do that. And then we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. So thank you for joining me. Let's go. So I'm going to read to you the first few verses of Isaiah chapter 2 from Sefaria.org. That's significant to us as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of course, because not only are these words found in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, but they're also found in the Book of Mormon, quoted almost directly from Nephi. And it's the same chapter in 2 Nephi 12 as it is in Isaiah chapter 2. So let me read you the first 3 verses, and we'll take a small break and talk about it. So, starting in verse 1. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, prophesied concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains, and tower above the hills, and all nations shall gaze on it with joy. And the many peoples shall go and say, Come, let us go up to the mount of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, that we may be instructed in God's ways, and that we may walk in God's paths. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, and the word of God from Jerusalem. If you were God, and you're talking to the kids that promised you that they would be obedient, and have persistently been rebelling against you, what would be the first words you'd want to tell them? I know if it were me, from my experiences of substitute teaching or trying to teach seminary or whatnot, when I am confronted with students or teenagers or what have you that aren't listening to me and they haven't been listening to me, my first message is not full of mercy for them. And I don't direct them to think, picture a time when we're all at peace. I don't do that. I come in guns blazing and I'm like, it has been 15 minutes. You have not been on task. Get back on task. And I love how I am kind of invited to repent here because God does not do that. This is a people we read from in chapter 1 that is full of idolatry, full of sin, unrepentant sin, by the way, who really like their material things. They worship their material things, and they forget about what's most important, which is taking care of each other and having a sense of community. And they like it that way. So for God to come in and not be like, y'all are toe up and you need to change. Instead, his first few words to them are, someday, this place is going to be beautiful to everyone, and everyone's going to know me through you. What? That's amazing to me. I love how he's full of mercy and he's so approachable, even while we are in the midst of being sinful. It's just beautiful to me. So I love that that's how he begins. Now, I think it's important, this might be a good part to pause on and discuss something. There's a hefty amount of ancient Israelite imagery running through the book of Isaiah. And I know I touched on it before with talking about the Levitical sacrificial offerings. I'm not going to go into nitty-gritty here. I just want to paint broad strokes pictures for you. Because in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and going forward, you're going to hear Isaiah describe things like fire and light and blood and sacrifice and gold, and he'll mention very specific trees, and different colors too will be significant. And all of that is to remind his Israelite audience of what the temple looks like and of what it means to be pure and impure. So let's just refresh ourselves on what all of that stuff is. So when you were to go to the ancient Israelite temple, before it was built in stone, it would be a tent. So I'll put pictures up for you to see for those that are able to look at the visuals on this podcast. For those who don't have a visual access to it, I will describe this for you. So last year and the year before, there have been a lot of people who have been putting together a replica of what the ancient Israelite temple looked like, the one that was the tent version that could be travel ready. So if you're looking at the temple, what you'll see around the entire thing, instead of seeing the structure first on eye level, you'll see a fence that is created by poles, string, and cloth. And around the majority of the temple, it's white. At the entrance, it is 3 colors. It's predominantly red. There's a thin line of purple, and then a chunk of blue, and then another thin line of purple, and then it fades back into red. Those 3 colors are very symbolic. Red, of course, is for blood, purple for royalty, blue for divinity. So as you walk into the entrance to the temple, you are symbolically washed in blood. You're purified as you come in. The first thing you'll see after that is you'll see the altar of the temple, which essentially is a large box with these protruding horns off the side. It's made out of bronze, and there's a fire going on inside of it all the time. At the very bottom, it's pretty tall, too. You have to either get on tiptoe or you have to go up by a ramp to look down inside it. And back in ancient Israelite days, when it's functional, it's usually smelling like a barbecue because there's meat and fat and animal parts that are being burnt inside of it. So you come in, first thing you see is the altar, which has fire going on, and it has a sacrifice being offered. On occasion, you might still see that they have blood wiped on the horns of the altar, but for the most part, that's the first thing that you see. As you progress past the altar, what you come to is a basin full of water, also with a horn on it, for being able to do ritual purification. And then the next thing that you would go to after that would be inside an actual tent with 2 rooms. The first room is what holds the shewbread, which is the bread that's offered as part of the sacrificial offerings. It's also available for the priests to eat. And then there's also candles being burnt there, and inside also is the incense that's being burned, which is symbolic of prayer, because like the smoke ascends to heaven, so our prayers ascend up to God. There will be a curtain in front of you, and behind that curtain is the Ark of the Covenant, which is supposed to represent the mercy seat, the place where Jehovah sits to give justice to the Israelites. So just by walking through the ancient Israelite temple, you have main themes. You have fire, smoke, gold, bronze, red, blood, purple, blue. All of those things represent temple, and the temple represents a close personal relationship with Jehovah. And in order to get to a position where you're in a close personal relationship with Jehovah, It requires becoming clean or ritually pure. And in broad strokes terms, when it comes to being ritually pure and impure, the main difference is what makes you impure is that which is a remnant of mortality. So touching fungus, touching a dead body, for women when they're in their menstruation cycle, things like that are reminiscent of a very temporal earthly existence are what make you ritually impure. Being impure is not sinful. There's nothing actually wrong with being impure. It's just you shouldn't go into God's presence carrying with you emblems of death and temporal existence when he's an eternal being. That's when it becomes dangerous to you because he is so pure, your impurity can make you just not be ready to be in his presence, essentially. If you want more information on that, a really great resource is looking up the Bible Project. They have a whole section on what it means for God to be holy, and that gives a lot of really good information and visuals when it comes to ritual purity and impurity. So I bring all of this up because in Isaiah chapter 1, that preface spends a very long time detailing just how impure the Israelites have become. That's why they're compared to dross, which is an impure version of silver. It's a weakened state. It's got minerals injected inside of the metal, so it can't adhere to itself very well. And the Israelites are also compared to watered down wine, which is an impure version of wine. So all of that is to really hit home the fact that the Israelites are no longer abiding by their covenant and their promise to worship God only. Instead, they're worshiping other people, other idols, things that they've made. They're worshiping money. They are not taking care of the people around them. And that's what makes them impure. And that's why Jehovah gets so frustrated in the beginning chapters of the book of Isaiah by saying, like, why are you giving me your offerings anymore? I know that your heart's not close to me. It doesn't mean anything to you. So why are you offering up your bullocks? I don't want them. I don't care about the fat of the bullock. Give me your heart. That's what I want. So knowing that a little bit more and having that temple imagery in mind, I'm going to go ahead and read through the rest of chapter 2 and we'll have a good discussion after that for those that want to stay. All right, I'm just going to start from the top, read straight through, because why not? The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, prophesied concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains and tower above the hills, and all the nations shall gaze on it with joy. And the many peoples shall go and say, Come, let us go up to the mount of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, that we may be instructed in God's ways, and that we may walk in God's paths. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, the word of God from Jerusalem. Thus God will judge among the nations, and arbitrate for the many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk by the light of God. For you have forsaken the ways of your people, O house of Jacob, for they are full of practices from the east, and of soothsaying like the Philistines. They abound in customs of the aliens. Their land is full of silver and gold. There is no limit to their treasures. Their land is full of horses. There is no limit to their chariots. And their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have wrought. But human shall be humbled, and mortal brought low. Oh, do not forgive them. Go deep into the rock, bury yourselves in the ground before the terror of God and God's dread majesty. The haughty look of humans shall be brought low, and the pride of mortals shall be humbled. None but God shall be exalted in that day. For God of hosts has ready a day against all that is proud and arrogant, against all that is lofty, so that it is brought low, against all the cedars of Lebanon, tall and stately, and all the oaks of Bashan, against all the high mountains and all the lofty hills, against every soaring tower and every mighty wall, against all the ships of Tarshish and all the gallant barks. Then human haughtiness shall be humbled, and the pride of mortals brought low. None but God shall be exalted in that day. As for idols, they shall vanish completely, and people shall enter caverns in the rock, and hollows in the ground before the terror of God, and God's dread majesty, when the Holy One comes forth to overawe the earth. On that day, humans shall fling away to the flying foxes and the bats the idols of silver and the idols of gold which they made for worshipping. And they shall enter the clefts in the rocks and the crevices in the cliffs before the terror of God and God's dread majesty, when the Holy One comes forth to overawe the earth. Oh, cease to glorify human beings, who have only breath in their nostrils, for by what do they merit esteem? Okay, so starting from the top, we have this really beautiful introduction where God is talking to the disobedient kids, the ones that made promises, aren't keeping them, and aren't receiving any of his correction. So as a parent, he's coming in and talking to his angsty, rebellious teenage kids. And the first words out of his mouth are words of mercy and saying, the future is bright. There is a good future ahead of us, and things are going to be good. I love that that's how he begins. And yeah, he definitely singes your eyebrows later on in the chapter, of course. Because the only way to achieve a good, glorious, bright future is if you let go of your sin. That is essentially the overarching summary of chapter 2. There is a beautiful vision ahead of us. And the only way to get there is if you repent. And you need to do it. And there's going to come a point where you wish you'd had repented. Where you're going to see me and you're going to be ashamed if you don't change things. That's what God is trying to put forth here in this second chapter. What's also really cool about this introduction is it's got an additional layer of meaning that could be kind of sassy on God's behalf. So on the front, on the face of it, God is reaching out this arm of mercy and saying, in the future, we're going to be good. But there's a little bit of turning on its head their expectations. So let's rewind back to the beginning of the nation of Israel. God comes to Abraham and says, I will make of you a mighty nation, and you're going to have a great posterity, innumerable as the sands of the sea. You're also going to inherit this very specific plot of land, and that's where you're going to be able to dwell. And what comes with that promise is the covenant that Abraham makes, which is your nation is set aside to know me so that you can go into the world and tell the world who I am. That's what they're supposed to do. That's part of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, partially because of their experiences in Egypt and post-Egypt and coming back into the promised land, the people, instead of spreading the truth about who Jehovah is, instead of doing that, they become very insular and prejudiced. They're surrounded by a whole bunch of other people groups that they're constantly at war with. And instead of reaching out the arm of mercy and brotherhood and saying, we worship Jehovah, I want to tell you about him, they fight and war and look down on everybody else who's not of their tribes. So what we get is people, this people is very insular people, and they consider themselves to be the only holy and pure nation because they have a very specific set of rules that they're supposed to abide by to become ritually pure, and they abide by them. They're people of the covenant. And therefore, they look at everyone else outside of them as impure and unworthy to be with Jehovah. So what's funny's not the right word, but I think it's kind of funny how at the very beginning of chapter 2, in this great message of how beautiful Jerusalem's going to be, it's going to be exalted above all hills, all mountains, everyone is going to flow into it. It's got this upheaval in it that says, by the way, Gentiles are going to come into your city and they're going to come get to know me. And if you're an Israelite in this day and age, in Isaiah's day and age, you could hear that and be like, no, that would obviously pollute our city. And yet, what Jehovah is saying is, you're already polluted because you're doing idolatry. You're no longer acting in the covenant that I gave you. So you are the pollutants. So it's like this really two-edged sword. It's a really smart, sassy, and merciful two-edged sword here, where he says there's a glorious day coming where all nations will flow into the city and they'll all want to know me. And they would be like, gross, we don't want that. So there's a really good section in Edward J. Young's commentary on page 101, breaking down the phrase, and all nations shall flow unto it. Because the word nation, I looked that up in the Blue Letter Bible, is goy or goyim, which usually gets reduced to Gentile. So it's obvious here that when he says all nations, he's not talking about like all the tribes of Israel in verse 2. It's all nations outside of Israel are going to flow into the city. So here's what it says. The strange picture is that all of the nations, even the two great nations of Isaiah's day, Syria and Egypt, flowing in a mighty confluence unto the mountain upon which the Lord's house is builded. The peoples of the world are actually likened to rivers. It's strange, particularly as it seems to involve the thought of a flowing up to a mountain. The same thought is expressed also by Jeremiah, who has probably based his language upon this present passage. Therefore they shall come and sing in the height of Zion, and shall flow together to the goodness of the Lord. This last clause must be construed as one which expresses result. As a result of the establishment and exaltation of Zion, all nations will flow unto her. By means of this picture, Isaiah wishes to teach the truth that the worship of the Lord expressed by metonymy. It's spelled metonymy. Metonymy. There we go. Metonymy. Okay. Expressed by metonymy as the mountain of the house of the Lord will triumph over all other religions and forms of worship. Corresponding to the rank in which the superiority of the worship of the Lord is revealed is that of its recognition outside of Israel. In Isaiah's day, this worship was comparably obscure and was practically confined to Israel. The nations regarded the Lord as the God merely of Israel, a local deity like Chemosh of the Moabites. In the latter days, however, inasmuch as Zion would be exalted, this religion of Israel would be known throughout the world. As during the Old Covenant, Jerusalem had been a pilgrimage center for the 3 annual festivals, so during the last days it is to become a center for the entire world. The mount is thus to serve as a unifying force for the whole world. It is to be a reversal of the dispersion, Babylon. At the city of confusion, Babel, mankind was dispersed. So at the city of peace, Jerusalem, mankind is to be united. In the place of the city of confusion stands the city of peace. In place of great human activity, there is the reign of God alone. Yeah, he just expresses it so much better. So you have this irony shooting through the whole passage that says, the city is currently impure, but one day it will be pure again. And by the way, that purity means it'll have Gentiles running through it. I can see how the people would have reacted to this message in Isaiah's day as like, ew, I don't want that. Because it's bringing up the idea that their current enemies, the political rivals of the day, Assyria and Egypt, are one day going to be so peaceful that they're going to come into the city and worship together with them. What? That's kind of unheard of. If we were to compare that to ourselves, it'd be like us and the Chinese and us and the Russians all coming together to worship together. I mean, I can't picture it. That's not because it's not possible, but because I have a terrible imagination. It just would be really difficult to imagine all 3 of us nations coming together and worshiping God at the same time. And yet, that's the kind of imagery that's talked about what Jerusalem will be like in the end days or the last days of this world. Really cool, huh? I want to take a moment to zoom in on verse 4 a little more specifically. Something that I really appreciate about the Sefaria translation is it uses the word arbitrate, which is really a cool additional understanding to this. So I want to actually read side by side the Sefaria translation and then immediately read it in 2 Nephi 12. That way we can see what words are used when and maybe have it give us a fuller picture of this moment of peace. Here's Sefaria. Thus God will judge among the nations and arbitrate for the many peoples. and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. 2 Nephi 12, verse 4. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. So instead of arbitrate, they have rebuke in 2 Nephi 12, which, if you look at the original Hebrew word in Isaiah through the Blue Letter Bible, let's go there. The Hebrew word is yakach, little ch at the end, which the definition is to prove, decide, judge, rebuke, reprove, correct, be right. So the translation of using rebuke, I mean, it's accurate. It just kind of has a connotation for us as modern people where we're like, I really don't like that, because we don't like being corrected. And especially rebuke seems much more heavy-handed, which is why I think the additional definitions that are given here are helpful in understanding why they chose to translate it as arbitrate for Sepharia. I think both are accurate. They just give us a fuller meaning. So here's the additional definitions. To decide or judge, to adjudicate, to show to be right or prove, to convince or convict, to reprove, chide, and to correct, rebuke, or to reason together, which is so beautiful. No wonder the concept of come now and let us reason together is used in the preface in chapter 1. It's trying to set up this very potent image of how Jehovah is the peacemaker. Jehovah is going to be here among this people, a very diverse, religiously, ethnically, and culturally diverse people. And he will be there to adjudicate among these people. And for those of you who didn't know, because I know I didn't, I just looked up the etymology of the word arbitrate, which means to reach an authoritative judgment or settlement. Comes from the Latin. That's like to judge, supreme ruler. So it's like, this is the person who has the final say. So we're going to turn to Jehovah in this society, and we're going to say, you judge between me and this other person that I have a conflict with. And whatever you reach, whatever settlement you reach, we'll go with it. And maybe it's clandestine or divinely inspired that I'm filming this podcast episode. Well, filming is a loose term. Either way, recording it at a time just after U.S. strikes on Iran. And I was reviewing today the events that led up to it and all of the negotiations that were attempted and that failed, with Iran wanting to build nuclear weapons and the rest of the global community saying, please no. And it's just really interesting. If you want to compare and contrast here, the best that we can do are like maybe what the Abraham Accords were trying to accomplish. And that even failed. And now we're resorting to airstrikes to try and deter Iran from continuing to build nuclear weapons. So that's like a really good contrast to show the best that humanity can do is kind of mutually assured destruction or mutually assured deterrence. And yet what Jehovah's aiming at is real peace, real negotiation, where one party comes and another party comes. Both of them are angry at each other for who knows what in the past, and Jehovah can pinpoint, this is where you went wrong, and turn to the other, this is where you went wrong. What will create a true negotiation and rest between the two of you? And I love how in verse 4, we get a feel for just how good Jehovah is at this. It will be such a profound peace created that everyone involved will no longer not only crave war, but they'll think, I don't even need weapons anymore. They'll beat their swords into plowshares. They'd rather use their sword to cultivate something good, their spears into pruning hooks. So instead of war, and war also entails, like these weapons also entail, needing to defend yourself. So profound will the peace be and the trust and rapport among this people be that they will recognize, I don't even need weapons to defend myself anymore. I can't fathom that. Can you? That astounds me to consider. Because even though the conflicts that I've had with other people in my life we're nowhere near bloodshed. I will still find myself when I interact with someone who maybe I've buried the hatchet, metaphorically, but I don't trust them. So I don't put my guard down when I'm around them. And I still make sure that I'm not like looking out for any chance that they could take advantage of me, but I'm wary, you know? Like, my experience is not what's being described here. We're talking a resolution that is so replete, so settling to every party involved, that they all agree, yeah, I have no desire to even arm myself or be wary of another individual. Everything is settled. It's all in the past. Forgiveness is abounded, and we're starting from scratch. And I trust these people now. Say, what? Wow. And one of my favorite stories of seeing Jehovah in action, where he's trying to arbitrate between various people groups, is actually the story of Jonah. Kind of counterintuitive, I know. But I love how the whole book is written. It's very hyperbolic and it's satire, and I absolutely adore satire. But at the very end, you have the interaction between Jonah and Jehovah. What I love about the book of Jonah is that we see Jehovah in action, where he's reasoning with someone who's very prejudiced. So he calls Jonah, just like as a quick recap. I know we all know the story, but sometimes it's nice to have a refresher. Jehovah calls Jonah to go to Nineveh. And Nineveh has been a place that they've been at war with the Israelites many, many times. It's the heartland of the Assyrian Empire. So, of course, Jonah's like, nah. He runs the opposite direction. Takes a ship going to the other end of the world, and a huge storm comes up, and the people who are on the boat were like, we're pretty sure there's a God that's angry with somebody on board. Jonah raises his hand and says, yeah, I'm the one that God's angry at. And so they toss him over. Reluctantly, Jonah says, just throw me over. He'd like rather die than go to Nineveh. It's nuts. And instead of dying, Jehovah has a big whale come eat him up and deliver him back to the coastline so that Jonah can go to Nineveh. And he does. He shapes up and he goes into Nineveh. He is so uncommitted to his mission, though, that he travels into the middle of the city and delivers a 5-word sermon that doesn't even say anything about how they're supposed to repent. All he says is, I can't remember what the time frame is, like in 5 days' time, the city is going to be burned if no one repents. And then he walks off. And then he goes and takes up a spot outside of the city where he can look over the whole city and watch it be destroyed. That is how begrudging and prejudicial Jonah is. Okay, fine, so I'll go, but I'll do like the bare minimum effort. And then I'm going to really rejoice when all of these people are torched to the ground. That's his attitude. So he's sitting up there, and because it's hot outside and the Lord wants to teach him a lesson, and he loves him, he has a little plant grow up to give him shade for like a day, overnight. And Jonah's like, this is awesome. What a great view. And now I have shade. And then the next day, the plant's killed because the Lord caused a worm to come up and eat the plant in the middle of the night. And Jonah flips out and is super angry over that. And he's like, no, lamenting the loss of a plant that he's only had around him for a day. Okay. This is what's awesome about the book of Jonah. It ends on a question. Jehovah asking Jonah these series of questions. And God said to Jonah, doest thou well to be angry for the gourd, which is the plant? And he said, I do well to be angry, even unto death. Then said the Lord, thou hast had pity on the gourd, for the which thou hast not labored, neither made its stick grow, which came up in a night and perished in a night. And should I not spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand? I love the pathos in that question. So that's like Jehovah in action, where he is reasoning with Jonah and trying to get him to a position where his heart posture is corrected towards the people of Nineveh. And we never hear the end of that story, probably because this was delivered to a Jewish audience, and the question was supposed to be posed to the Jewish people to help the Jewish people correct their heart posture. Fantastic. That's a small, and I'm sure we can all come up with countless examples in Scripture where Jehovah is fantastic at reasoning between diverse groups of people. I mean, when Jesus, when he came to the earth, he got tax collectors and fishermen together and talked to prostitutes and people who were heavily studying Torah he knows how to work with very different and diverse people and get them in line on the same goal. And he knows how to do it without strong-arming anybody. He can elicit a voluntary response out of someone. He just loves them, and then they want to love back and reciprocate. So that is a glorious future to look forward to with Isaiah. The glorious future talked about in Isaiah chapter 2 is just such a beautiful thing to see how profound the peace will be among a people group that is so widely diverse that you never would expect that they'd be able to settle together, and yet they can, because Jehovah does his job well. He can bring peace to anyone well. And I want to add my little own personal note to this. Hopefully it's not too personal and you guys will appreciate it. But my parents were divorced when I was 9 years old. My dad left my mom. I felt utterly betrayed by him, especially since I was a lot like my mom, even as a little girl. And I used to feel like anytime someone would give me a compliment and say like, oh, you're just like your mother, it would just be like another nail in the coffin of like, yep, and my dad doesn't want me. That's just kind of how I felt most of my life. And I never thought that I would ever get to have the kind of relationship with him that was truly like daughter to father. It would make me cry in movies and in TV shows and in songs when they would show this really stellar father-daughter relationship, because in my mind and my heart, I thought that that will never be us. You know, I'll never be able to love him. I'll never be able to trust him again. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an orphan when it comes to a dad. I don't have one. And God has had such a fantastic, profound influence in my life. The more that I have followed God in my life, that I have emulated Jesus' example, the more that I've studied and served and prayed, the more God has been bent on giving me my dad back in a truly reconciling relationship. I remember being 14 years old in the middle of Sunday school on a Father's Day, just a complete wreck because Father's Day was salt in the wound, reminding me that I didn't have the dad that I wanted. And yet on that Father's Day as a 14-year-old, God replaced the apathy in my heart that I had for my dad and gave me a pure love that didn't come from me for him. And I just wept. And from that day forward, I loved my dad again. And then going forward after my mission, after I served my mission for 18 months in Tucson, Arizona, I took an ethics class. It brought up a book that I read that helped me see that I'd been living as a victim of what my dad's choices had been. And it helped me want to actually reconcile with my dad. So I talked to my dad about how painful it was that he left and that I wanted to start a fresh relationship with him again and actually build something with him again. And we have since then. Bit by bit, I have grown to trust him like a daughter trusts a dad. And even though it didn't happen when I was a child, it happened when I was an adult, God gave me my dad back. The caliber of the relationship that we have, I never could have anticipated. I wasn't even thinking this could happen in the eternities, to be frank. And yet here it is. I mean, it only took a few years for us to get to a point where we are comfortable sharing with each other how we think and how we feel, even when we know that the other person doesn't agree with us. That is so beautiful. Even when we passionately disagree, we still love each other more. So we share with each other what we think and what we feel so that we can stay connected to each other. That's more important than being in agreement. And I think that is just such a beautiful thing. So I have had a chance to experience in my life something akin to what's talked about in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, where the weapons of war, or if you look up the original etymology, I'll get into this in a later podcast, but when you think about a weapon, it can be considered a vessel of bitterness. That's what the ancient Greek and Hebrew words mean. A vessel of bitterness. So all of the bitterness that I had been harboring in my life is gone. And it has been replaced with this sweetness of connection with my dad, so that I no longer want to be at war with him in my own heart. Instead, I just have this profound belonging with him, no matter what he's done and no matter what he continues to do. And I think he feels the same for me, no matter what I've done or continue to do. And that I just want to witness is possible, but it's only possible through the mercy, involvement, and blessing hands of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Okay, so that gets us from verse 1 to verse 4, which is like the inspired leadership of Jehovah to give the people a vision, a beautiful, glorious future vision of what they're aiming for. Before he comes back to the present in verse 5 and says, Oh, house of Jacob. This is where you see the mourning of Jehovah and the craving that he has to be at one with his people, to be in a close, intimate, personal connection with each person. And no wonder he bemoans the fact that they are not following him anymore. So verse 5 and 6, just to reiterate, O house of Jacob, come, let us walk by the light of God. For you have forsaken the ways of your people, O house of Jacob, and for they are full of practices from the east and of soothsaying like the Philistines. They abound in customs of the aliens. So, two things. In verse 5, when it says, let us walk by the light of God, what a Jewish audience might hear is when they hear the word light, and walking by light is how their ancestors in the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness were covered by a shadow by day, so they were sheltered from the heat, and then a pillar of fire by night, so that they could keep walking in the nighttime if they had to. So I love that idea. Let us walk by the light of God. It's going back into a yield to him. Let him be the one who's guiding you, who's sheltering you and giving you light. It's such a beautiful image. And then, continuing forward, for they are full of the practices from the east and of the soothsaying like the Philistines. What it sounds like is, when you know someone really well and you care about them and then they start dating someone else and their personality starts to change and their preferences start to go, and they don't enforce their own boundaries really anymore and say, I really don't like doing that. They would rather conform to the person that they're dating. That's kind of what it feels like is happening in verse 6, where Jehovah's looking down and saying, this people that used to be mine, that I used to know, that we were in covenant with, they're changing and becoming like other people who have toxic practices, who aren't healthy, who don't know me. They're becoming a stranger to me. That is incredibly painful for any parent out there. I'm not a parent. I don't know what this feels like, so I can only imagine how painful it is to have a child that you love, you know well, you're dedicated to, totally change. And maybe the reason could be for things like doing drugs or pornography, addictive things, or it could be because of other relationships and people pulling your kid away from you, and they're changing and not becoming who you know they are deep down inside. I mean, as their parent, you saw them at every age of life and every stage of development. You know who they are. And to see them turn their back on who they are to follow someone else or a pack of other people, that's just got to be so devastating. That's the devastation that comes through in verse 6. Like this, I know who you are, Israel, and you'd rather be like the Philistines. And it breaks his heart. And that's what he's referring to when it says their land is full of silver and gold in verse 7. He's talking about not only the Philistines, but now the Israelites. All of y'all are now, your land is full of silver and gold. There's no limit to treasures. Your land is full of horses. There's no limit to their chariots, which talking about chariots is significant because that's the military arm that they have. That is their swift moving artillery force, are their chariots. So their land is full of horses, there's no limit to their chariots. It's talking about military might. So yes, they're affluent, they're rich, they're militarily strong, and their land is full of idols. They do bow down to the work of their own hands, what their own fingers have wrought. How sad. To really get a feel for this concept, in verse 8, for Sepharia, they translate it as they bow down to the work of their own hands. 2 Nephi 12, verse 8 says they worship the work of their own hands. So I think both of those words can give us a greater understanding of what it is that we can picture in this scenario. So in the original Hebrew, the word shachah is to bow down prostrate, to crouch, to fall down, to beseech, to reverence, to stoop. You make yourself lower than the thing that you're facing, right? And then if you look at the word worship in the 1828 dictionary, which is what words meant when Joseph was translating the Book of Mormon, to worship is to adore, to pay divine honors to reverence with supreme respect and veneration. So they are reverencing and making themselves lower than an object they made. That is wild to me. I mean, can you imagine an author writing a really great book and then thinking that that book that he created and wrote is superior to himself, the person who created it? What? That's wild. It's a direct inversion also of the creation story in Genesis 1. You have all of these wonderful details of how God brought this earth into the universe. And he spends time at the end of each section saying, God saw it and said it was good. It was good. And then when man was put onto the earth and the creation was complete, he said it was very good. But God does not worship his creation. He knows he's the creator. He's the originator. He's what it flowed from. So he is superior to it. That is just how it goes. He made it. He loves it. He thinks the earth is absolutely wonderful. And he thinks it's good. But it is not him. And he knows it. So when these people are so messed up inside that they will worship the thing they made with their own hands and consider that thing that they made as superior to themselves, wow, I don't know. I can't fully grasp how warped you have to be on the inside to make that happen. I can understand a smidge, because as someone who's trying to write and produce my own music, I understand placing a lot of my own value as a musician on the product that I create. It's really easy to do that because you think, this is my baby. This is the thing that I've been devoting and pouring myself into. I hope other people like it. And if they don't like it, it's easy to feel a personal rejection from that and think that, oh, if this song is worthless, I'm worthless because I made it. And throughout history, I mean, we see people like Beethoven, stupendous composer, stupendous. He would feel very much the same way. He would think that he was only as good as the last thing that he wrote. And he's not the only musician. I mean, if you look in the history of musicians in almost every genre, especially in jazz, you see that there are a lot of artists who are truly great and they're remembered and they're legends and they die super young because their lives are tied to what they can produce. They're only as good as they can create. And that is a tragedy. An absolute tragedy. Because the reality is, we are always greater than the thing that we make because it flowed from us. And our worth is completely detached from what we create too, which is why God is like able to have this emotional distance between him and the earth that he created. Because now the earth is in a reduced spiritual state as the result of his children's decisions. It's in a fallen world. He doesn't take it personally and say, oh, my world is fallen, therefore I'm fallen. Why would he do that? He knows the world is different from him. It's a beautiful creation that he poured himself into, but it is not him. So in this society with Isaiah, this is a people who are creating objects of worship. And they're bowing down and considering themselves lesser than the thing that they just made. If that's not soul sickness, I don't know what is. If that's not seeing the world in a warped manner, I don't know what is. So naturally, as a father who cares about his children, especially his children that are sick with sin, he obviously wants to help them heal and correct. And so naturally he'd point that out and say, that's messed up. You need to change that because you're not going to be happy and fulfilled until you do. That's just good parenting. Just saying, good parenting. Heck, if I were to look at the success of this podcast series and say, I am only as worthwhile as this podcast is, if it's not successful, then therefore I am not successful, I would be miserable. And that God's not about misery. I mean, men are that they might have joy. That's what he says. That's the purpose of this existence, is joy maximizing. So of course he's going to be like, yeah, you need to get rid of that. You need to detach yourself from what you've created and what you are, totally different things. You're my child. You will always be worthwhile to me, no matter what. No matter what you do, no matter what you create. That's why you should worship me, because I will give back to you. The thing that you've made will never get back to you. It will only take from you. All right, moving on. A quick note, not as like something that's super important, I don't think. I could be wrong. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But in verse 9, it's very interesting. In 2 Nephi 12, this is how the wording is. And the mean man boweth not down, and the great man humbleth not himself, or humbleth himself not. Therefore forgive him not. So the way that it's translated in Sepharia is, but human shall be humbled, and mortal brought low. Oh, do not forgive them. So I looked up what some of the words were for where it says human in Sepharia, or mean man in 2 Nephi 12. The word is Adam. That's the word that Adam comes from. He's created from the dust of the earth. Adam is a play on words. It's like the dust of the earth. It just means mankind, period. So that's why it's translated as human. I'm not sure why it's created as mean man in 2 Nephi 12. Probably to be like a synonym of the natural man, or man in his natural state. That's kind of the feel that it gives. And then same thing with mortal and mortal brought low. The word in 2 Nephi 12, where it says in the great man, the word yish in Hebrew is the word for great man. So it also is designating the fact that this is a male and it is a mortal male. So that's why it's like mortal shall be brought low, or great man brought low. It's very similar to how, I don't know if anybody here listens to political philosophy, just offhand, but Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, he saw what the greatness and the pinnacle of man's greatness was his ability to triumph over all of his foes. So even though he recognized, yeah, all of us are going to die, there is no life after this, this is our one shot, the way that we maximize that one shot is to dominate over everybody else. That's kind of what the phrase means, and mortal brought low, or and the great man brought low. It's trying to remind us that there are people out there that think the only version of success, or the only life that's worthwhile and worth living, is the one that amasses all the power. And that ideology, that mentality, and people who think that way are going to be humbled and brought low. They're going to realize they put all their eggs in a very bad basket, because that's not what's most worthwhile. Amassing power means nothing. And they've given all of their life, their energy and talent to it, and to have no reward in the end. Which is why the imagery becomes so interesting in verse 10 forward, where it's like, go deep into the rock, bury yourselves in the ground before the terror of God and God's dread majesty. Because that's kind of what you want to do. Like there's no further down you can get. That is the basement level. So you're going to be humbled to the basement. That's what it means. So go bury yourself. Go get deep and humbled. So that's the same imagery continued forward in verse 11. The haughty looks of humans shall be brought low. The pride of mortals shall be humbled. None but God shall be exalted in that day. And if you're just coming into this not knowing who God is, you could look at that and be like, well, that's kind of messed up because it seems unfair. Like, why would God exalt himself above everybody else and tell everybody else, get down to the dirt? You know, out of context, not knowing God, that could be an easy assumption to make. When in reality, all that's happening is that this world, which is really good at obscuring reality and how things actually work and what matters, it'll all be set to right. Things will be adjusted so that we see that that which is worth veneration and worship is worshipped. That's why God is exalted, because he is the origin of all love, peace, and belonging. He is exalted because he is goodness embodied. And that's something that we aspire to, but haven't yet reached. And so we need to be in the position of humility and recognizing, yeah, he's our Father, and he's better at this than we are, and we get to learn from him and not not assume we are him. That's it. That's all that's trying to be. Well, sorry, when I say that's it, I really shouldn't reduce all of Isaiah down to my words. Obviously, I'm sure there's more meaning there that I just don't know. So if you catch anything cooler in there, I want to know about it. But for now, that's what I pull when I am reading that verse. So that same kind of imagery flows throughout the rest of the chapter. I think you can read through it on your own and really get swept up in the different visualizations that Isaiah provides, reiterating the same theme of everything that you've built up that's built up without me and that's built up on unrighteous principles is just going to be cast down. Everything that you're proud of about yourself that's not rooted in your divine origins of God, it's just not going to last. That's like a small snippet, for example, in verse 13, the cedars of Lebanon, those are trees that were like renowned around the world for being high quality, high caliber. I think they're even disease resistant, and they're very famous at this time. So Lebanon is like super chuffed. They're really proud of the fact that they have these great cedars. So it's become part of the Lebanon's national identity of being able to say, well, look at us and our cedars. And of course, that's what's targeted by Jehovah and saying, see, you're defining your greatness by your trees. I'm pretty sure that's not what is important here. What matters is how you treat each other and that you belong to me. So let's get back to the origins of what really matters. So I hope that helps with being able to go through and visualize all of the rest of the stuff and not get caught in the weeds. I hope that's a good guide for you to be able to read the rest of it and know, oh, okay, so anytime that I'm defining myself by a salient characteristic that isn't that I'm a child of God, then I'm doing it wrong. And it's easy to do. I fall victim to that. I always want to be a good musician. That's what I start to define myself as. And if I'm not attentive enough, or if I don't listen when the Spirit tries to prompt me back and remembering, hey, Dara, you're my daughter. First and foremost. You could be a crappy musician and you'd still be my daughter. Then I start to become more miserable. I start to tie my value as a human being, my whole life, towards what I can produce. And that's just so lackluster, isn't it? I mean, how reductive is that? So, that's the invitation that's given to us in chapter 2, is to not define ourselves by something that's arbitrary, indefinite, that is something that's only glorious according to the world's standards and that won't last. Instead of belonging to God and being a part of a Zion-like society that's a city full of peace and goodwill and building and community and belonging. Okay, so you know how you're cruising along and you're reading and understanding something, and then a new insight comes to you that you didn't notice before. In the middle of recording this podcast, I realized that there's a biblical worldview that could really be helpful in picturing what Isaiah is picturing, and then also understanding what the Jewish audience would have heard when talking about the people going into the clefts of the rocks and hiding in caves before the great majesty of the Lord. I'll put a picture up so that you can see it, but essentially it's kind of like the snow globe of the Old Testament. That's kind of how the worldview was seen back then. The world is flat. There's a dome above it that was created by Jehovah. There's columns of the earth that are way down deep. And then Sheol it's underground. That is the waiting place where all spirits go to and all people go to after they die. And that, I think, even though that word is not actually used in Isaiah, he doesn't say, and everybody who's haughty or the mean man will go to Sheol. It doesn't say that, but it describes what Sheol looks like. It's being inside of a cavern and the cavity of a rock, down deep. It's being buried. That's what's being described. So I think there's something more to it where Isaiah is trying to get the audience to hearken to, if you're not going to repent, death is at the end of this road, and Sheol is where you go when you die. And that's where you're going to put yourself. When God comes, that's where you want to be, actually, because you're not ready to meet him. Really cool. I'm going to have to meditate on that a little bit longer. But let me know your thoughts below of what you think. Do you know anything about Sheol? What does it mean? I know a very surface level understanding of it. So any additional insight would really be helpful. Okay, I think that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for sticking around. If there was anything that wasn't clear, please let me know in the comments. I can try and clarify it for you. If there's anything you disagree with, I'd love to hear that as well. And I hope this has been enriching for you in your study of Isaiah, and also especially helping you to better understand and get closer to God through these passages and hear his voice coming through somehow. May the Spirit guide you into knowing your Father better. With me or without me, I don't care. I just want you to get closer to him. All right, well, have a great rest of your day. Happy reading. Bye.